Okay, great. Battery girl, I have ADHD. We're all caught up. Okay, so along with the usual suspects of distraction, hyperfocus, time blindness, and hyperthinking, how it presents itself in my brain is emotion regulation. And a way that I've kind of thought about how to explain this is how I imagine most people experience their emotions. It's just like good, bad, happy, sad, whatever the emotion is. It's just like a little part of what happens, and then they kind of just carry on. This is how I experience emotions. They are big and consuming, and I feel them everywhere in my body. And so much so that they stop me in my tracks. Thank you, Battery Girl. In some ways, I feel very, very lucky because when I'm happy, I feel such like a pure joy and I'm very much in the moment. But when I'm sad, I also get very, very sad. So these last few years have been especially hard for everyone. I got hit with a couple good punches in a row, and I just reached a point where that usual sadness was deeper than it had ever been, and it felt like it was starting to close in and suffocate me. So in the end, this project actually became about survival, because I knew that if I didn't figure out how to be happy, I wasn't going to make it. I knew that the path I was on was no longer an option. Okay, good. So that's when I started therapy. And I also started researching for this project. I read a lot and I thought a lot and I felt a lot. And this is relevant to this capstone project because with everything that we do, there's a finite amount of time to do it. So with this project, my why was so big and so important and so beyond just making something that it ended up taking a very large portion of the available time, which means that the how, so the learning and figuring out and the iterations still got a significant amount of time, but that left the what, the object, the fabrication, just like a little boopsie at the end. But what's really cool about this is that I've done the hard part. I figured out why I'm doing this, not just this project, but this career and what I value in life. I literally found my meaning of life. Super cheesy. I know this is no small feat because it has taken so much of my available time and energy. And it is the thing that I'm most proud of. I can say that I'm actually happy. So the next timeline for the next project that I do looks like this. Oops, there we go. The why portion is so small because all I have to do is check in with myself and make sure that what I'm doing aligns with the values that I find meaningful. The how is larger because there is now more space, both in time and cognitive availability to develop skills and knowledge. And the what also gets more of me. And then the next project I do after that will look more like this. Again, the why is just a quick check-in. Now the how is a bit smaller because I've built an abundance of knowledge and skills, which leaves so much time and space for the what to become something. And with each new project, the what gets to become more of everything because the foundation of the why and the how are continuously being solidly built. So now let's get into the nitty-gritty of my capstone. I did it. So why? Why do I want to make the thing? Through my research, I began to realize that I do not align with a lot of the values of our current economic system. And it turns out there have been many designers and makers throughout history and current day who have or do feel the same way. Okay, let's go on a quick journey. 1897. Just want to let you know that I'm saying 1800s, which is a really long time ago, which means we've had a lot of time to correct some of these things that we are just not doing. Anyways, so this is a piece from William Morris in his book, News from Nowhere. It's a description of capitalism. I will read it. To the cheapening of production, as it was called, everything was sacrificed. the happiness of the workman at his work, nay, his most elementary comfort and bare health, his food, his clothes, his dwelling, his leisure, his amusement, his education, his life, in short, did not weigh a grain of sand in the balance against this dire necessity of cheap production of things, a great part of which were not worth producing at all. So what this means to me is this is sort of the beginning of the loss of humanity. This is where we started valuing meaningless objects over human life in almost every capacity. Then we go to Bauhaus, Walter Gropius. We all know this fella. So this is the manifesto, which we've read 1,000 times, but I shall read it again. To let us therefore create a new guild of craftsmen, free of the divisive class pretensions that endeavor to raise a prideful barrier between craftsmen and artists. Let us strive for, conceive, and create the new building of the future that will unite every discipline, architecture and sculpture and painting, and which will one day rise heavenwards from the million hands of craftsmen as a clear symbol of a new belief to come. So what I am taking away from this is Gropius is speaking on this division between idea and labor. We've idolized intellectual thought and devalued labor. And what that does is, again, creates a rift in humanity because now we can no longer understand each other. Not only that, the people who are doing the making do not have a say in the creation of their built world. So the work that they do is meaningless. And the people with the ideas don't understand what it takes to achieve what they're thinking. And so they're unfulfilled by just the idea itself. So what he's saying is that we should all have a hand in the thinking and the making. Okay. Then this one's just cute. Buckminster Fuller, Spaceship Earth. A worldview encouraging everyone on Earth to act as a harmonious crew working toward the greater good. 1964. We're just all humans on one planet trying to be happy. So I just don't know why we keep fighting each other. Silly. Putin, go away. Okay, next is Victor Papanuk, Design for the Real World, 1985. All humans are designers. All that we do almost all the time is design. For design is basic to all human activity. The planning and patterning of any act towards a desired foreseeable end constitutes the design process. Any attempt to separate design, to make it a thing by itself, works counter to the fact that design is the primary underlying matrix to life. Design is composing an epic poem, executing a mural, painting a masterpiece, writing a concerto, but design is also cleaning and reorganizing a desk drawer, pulling an impacted tooth, baking an apple, choosing sides for a backlot baseball game, and educating a child. So what he's speaking to again is this division of, I'm going over for sure, this division of thought versus labor. And he's saying that we are all capable of designing and building the lives that we want. But because we are constantly told that there's one right way to do things and one right way to be happy, if that doesn't work for us and we continuously fail, we stop believing in ourselves and we stop trying. So we stop making our lives. And that's speaking to the fact that problem solving can never yield the one right answer. There are an infinite number of answers. Some are more right and some are more wrong. So the answer depends on who you are, what you value, what you're trying to achieve, your place in time. There is no one universal way to be or one right way to do this, which means every person is a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and we are all very unique, and every solution is a little bit right and a little bit wrong. Which finally brings us to Erich Fromm and the Art of Loving. So in order to embrace this uniqueness in all of us, we have to be able to support others' self-chosen goals without resentment, because we are also choosing our own goals and are fulfilled in that way. And in order to do that, you need to practice what I believe is the purest form of love. So you have to have humility, which lets go of your ego, courage to try new ideas and be curious about the world. Faith is an acceptance of your failures with a willingness to learn and a rational belief that things will work out. And discipline is just to do the thing every day. So all of this, oh, wait, no, I forgot a good point. The coolest part of this is what we've been doing for the last 4 years. This humility, courage, faith, and discipline, that's design. That's what we have learned to just become our natural way of being, at least for me. And I think that is so incredible about this program. So why? Oh, oops. All of that together comes to give me why I'm doing this project, why I want to make the thing. Because I want to design and build whole environments or furniture pieces that are humanizing, stimulate curiosity, nurturing, and convivial. Through a rich understanding of my values and skill sets, I aspire to contribute to the creation of our built world by celebrating each project's uniqueness. Then we go to the how. How am I going to do that? With the constraints of this project, which is building furniture for socializing, repeatable, I want to be able to make more than one of them. Native wood species, I want to try and use local materials as much as possible, and it needs to be made for a public space, which means it needs to be durable. It will be. So with those constraints, then where do I find an atmosphere or a thing in life that is humanizing to me, stimulates my curiosity while nurturing it, and is convivial? And I came to realize that it's at, oh no, I'm doing it backwards, but that's fine. Still carrying on. Something that allows you to communicate this is the grid. There we go. So the grid to me has 3 sort of key components as to why I was so fascinated by it. It is the foundation for communication in the visual world. So if you do not have a strong foundation, if you're drawing and your lines are off, or if you're building and your obviously foundation sucks, or if you don't have a strong why you're doing something, then if you hit turbulence or you try to expand, something goes wrong and it will all crumble. But if you have a strong foundation, you have something to just push you forward, that motivation to keep going. It facilitates in the crossover from mental space into visual space. So if you want to work with anyone, you have to be able to communicate your ideas, and the grid is just kind of the base for that. And it is the underlying structure of so much of what is built by humans. And the reason that I like this is because there's a brutal honesty about it, that in the understructure of almost everything that we build, there is this purity, this like visually porous thing that's a little bit rough, but you know exactly what it's there for, you know exactly what it's doing, and no one's tried to trick you or beautify it to make you think that it's something that it's not. So there we go. Using the grid, the constraints, and my why, where do I find an environment that is all of these things? And that's at the local bar. So then I started thinking about bar furniture, chairs and tables and all that fun stuff. And then Peter showed me Matthias Pleasing's work, and I was really fascinated by his use of this gridded structure to make this very organic seating. And then I started researching his work a bit more and some other people who do steam bending and sort of boat building. And then I started steam bending and made a lot of mistakes, learned a lot. And then I started playing around with how the strips would move from a larger scale to smaller and how they would overlap and intersect. Then I thought about making a pedestal table, so I built this form on CNC so I could put linear strips up it, and that would be the gridded structure. Started drawing, more drawing. I made this weird mock. This is so far from what I was doing. I call this the sad girl stool because I made this model when I was the saddest I've ever been. Then I made some other weird models, some more weird models. And then I made a structure to practice the steam bending on. And this is the point where Peter and I kind of realized that this was not going to be something that I could do by hand. I had to go to the computer. So then I spent the next 3 months, feels like, of my life on Fusion and working with the CNC. And again, I made a lot of mistakes, I still have to fix that. I'm sorry. Lots and lots of mistakes. And then it finally worked. I made a form, tried it out. The shape wasn't ergonomic, so then I had to go back and redesign it. And then I started building that again. And then I realized that in order to do this complicated cut, I had to find exact middle. So then we put dowels in. This is an example of the cut. This is what it looks like before, like as it comes out of the plywood. And then I shape it with this guy, forget the name right now. Another mistake is the waste that I produced from this. So I have to figure out how to use the material more efficiently. Another mistake, I was building the rails and the bit was too short. So I just started spinning into the wood. Sorry again. And then things kind of started working a little bit. And then we get into the what. What did I make? I made a bar stool. It is a single piece of a larger environment where I find connection and a sense of conviviality in the world. To make this stool, I will steam bend strips of white oak over a set of CNC router cut ribs. This will create a hollow, gridded, and seemingly amoebic structure that has the appearance of taking over and becoming one with the tight and inelegant geometric stool base, a melding of opposites to create a visually curious piece of furniture. But that's as far as I got. Because remember, this is the timeline that I was working on. And to leave you with a little bit of another nugget of wisdom from Emile Siron, by failing, it gives us an honest picture of ourselves. And if you fail, it just means that you tried to grow and live a life bigger than before. And at least you're not boring. So, thank you. And this is the thing. It's so weird. You can actually sit in it too. It looks like you maybe shouldn't, but it worked. If you want to try it, just be gentle. Oh.
Now we all want to try it.
Okay. Any questions? I can't believe I did that without like sobbing.
Well, Kirsten's giving a test drive. The battery girl has a very strong resemblance to you, actually, surprisingly. And a very highly metaphoric presentation that you made. And I guess in some cases, I was interested to see how, I guess, diametrically opposed some of the quotations you gave were. So I think it's always worth looking at oppositions, where you say there's no right way to be, and yet there's this massive critique of capitalism. And as a part of the field needs to be generating capital, it's something worth acknowledging.
Yeah, I see. I definitely see that. And I mean, it was a 20-minute presentation. I could talk to you all day about this.
Yeah, you kind of already have, so we'll leave it there.
I know. But yes, thank you, Peter.
So much of what you presented kind of rang true with me because, I make mistakes on my CNC machine every day. And it's brutal punishment to be a creative person, an emotional person, and deal with the hard realities of a machine that seems to have its own will and has a complexity way beyond pushing something properly through a router or a table saw, right? So I'm quite amazed that you chose the route of having to negotiate with a level of software, complex software, and a complicated machine to embody this thing that, you saw this is the way forward. And then also I come to things very late as well. I don't consider myself I didn't become who I am until about a year after I graduated from architecture school. And so I wanted to make the point that, like, yes, for everybody here, we're kind of wrapping school up, right? But we're still us, and there's still a continuum of us going into the world in this incredibly open and accepting and supportive environment that we probably will never see again. It's a utopia here in some ways.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, you have the freedom now to, and I mean everybody, pursue your goals and your skills in the real world. We've all been given a good kind of foundation, but it's never too late to keep pushing those things. And in the real world, that's where the real world is.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's the point that I'm trying to make is, even though this chair is not done, neither am I. And I love it. And I'm so excited to come back next year because I still have classes to finish and work on it. And because I'm making it from a place of personal meaning, it doesn't make me angry that it's not done. I'm just excited to keep working on it. And I think that's been the biggest shift in my mental game for really my whole life. When Vesper presented her project, my first thought was, oh, they have all the same struggles as I do. How could they finish and not me? And I had to remind myself that we have different limitations. We have different lives. And for the first time in my entire life, I truly believe I didn't fail. I'm just not done. And I think that's the point I'm trying to get across is we all do things different ways and different speeds, and it doesn't mean that we're not good. We just do it different. And it's taken me a really long time to believe in that. And it makes me really sad that I have spent the majority of my life at war with myself about all of this. So this project this year, the school has been incredibly profound for me. It has changed my life. And I'm just so excited to see what happens with the new skills and this new belief in myself that I've never had before. So that's what this chair is. Sorry. Yeah. It's also very comfortable if you've sat in it.
It is comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad that it came at the end, but you just thankfully finally said that it's not a failure.
Yeah.
Because you did say throughout your presentation a few times you used the word failure, and it reminds me. I had a meeting recently talking about a project, and the person I was having the meeting with brought up also something about their project that was a failure. I found it a really harsh and also just an interesting way to find someone's perspective on something, something that we were working on together. But I'm glad to hear that you're on a path in which you can see that this isn't something in which there is a failure. The reality is we're in school, obviously, and school is structured in terms of passing grades and whatnot. So that is the constraints of being here. However, your ability to look at this and say, there's a personal thing I'm trying to get from this. And then on top of that, I'm going to see this through. And this is just part of a process for you personally, as well as making something. I'm glad that that's where you're at.
Yeah.
It's nice
It
that that's where you've got to.
feels
with
good.
it. I think I would be thrilled if next year you asked whoever your teacher is to say, I would come back. Maybe Scott and I will carpool and see where you're at next year with it, because I think there's more to come with it.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to see where you go with it next, and then sit in it and see how because there's lots of things I can ask, but I know they're not resolved yet.
I mean,
And you're working on it. So
ask a few things because they're I don't know, it's problem solving. This is a prototype
Right.
that I never got to like talk. But also if we're out of time, we can move on. Yeah.
Just quickly on that note, yeah, Matthias Placing is an amazing designer and artist, and you know, he uses those flowing lines, and I think technically I've made some pieces like this before, and to imagine a bent white oak, I think is really I can't get my head around how that would actually be built.
Well, these
Because
pieces are stained plywood, and then just the strips would be white
Yeah,
oak.
yeah, I understand. But I don't think the oak can take those kind of turns. But I'm amazed at how the cardboard is actually comfortable.
It's
And so I was
quite,
thinking
yeah.
like, well, why not leather? You know, why not leather straps or something that can actually bend and conform
Yeah.
rather than something rigid that you'll be fighting against every angle and every connection to make those tight turns. So just wanted to say that.
No, that's great.
Yeah, he gets to waltz in here and
Yeah.
make the right suggestions.
Yeah. Where have you been all year?
Yeah, right.
I'm so happy to hear that you know, are feeling good about, or at least satisfied with how this project has come along and the progress that you've made. I don't entirely remember what I was going to say, but you know, when it comes to like the comparison of like how did they finish and I didn't, I mean, I'm also astonished that I finished, but you know, it's done by A, cutting 30% of my workload, and B, having, you know, I don't live independently. And I've always really admired about you that you know, you're balancing work and school. You live or lived in Toronto at least, which is a big commute. And you're juggling all of those things and also still coming here and pouring so much passion into the work that you do.
Thank you. Cool. That's it. We good? Yes. Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mary. Today I will present my neo-Chinese furniture to you guys. So my objective is to create my own unique neo-Chinese style in furniture and create the conversation between past and then present. So let's talk about what is neo-Chinese style. So neo-Chinese style was born in new period of Chinese traditional culture renaissance, featuring the connection and grace based on the comprehension of traditional culture. Neo-Chinese style is simply defined as the expression of Chinese contemporary traditional culture and then combines the modern elements with traditions. So here I found some inspiration images which can representing like you can see some Asian influence design elements, and then also the simplifies the structure and then or exploring the structure to make more modernized furniture. So among these, as you can see, the furniture style, among these different Chinese dynasty, I love the Ming Dynasty the most. I got a lot of inspiration by the Ming Dynasty because the Ming Dynasty is the peak of the development of Asian furniture in China, occupying the most important position in the history of furniture in China, even in the history of the world, known as its simple form and a reasonable construction. So I began do some research based on these three questions. What are the visual attributes of Ming Dynasty furniture, which I want to take and to learn about, and then what are the idea behind like the original design, and what other design, like designer already exploring the past and the present in their works. So the answer I found for Ming Dynasty furniture main characteristic is the furniture structure science. So they do a lot of joinery without nails and glue, just using like models and antenna in different such a way. As you can see, I did some ancillary study of the traditional Chinese joinery without using glue, especially like this like legs construction, curved shoulders joinery. It's pretty complex to make while I'm doing it. And also the beauty of the Ming Dynasty is also the decorative parts. They have like decorative parts, but not complex compared to Qing Dynasty furniture. And then they use the natural color and texture of material. Also, they also pay more attention about that. And then basically you can see it's all curved and then rounded element. There's a lot. And they also consider labor saving production and appropriately using a material and a reasonable structure. And then during the research, I found out during this time period, the architecture and then garden always reference back to the core of Chinese Tao's philosophy through representing by Lao and then Zhuangzi, the concept of the neutrality of nature and human. So I want to explore more about that. The idea of human and the nature being as one, showing the beauty of the symmetry, and then from the nature, and then also the yin yang from like a traditional Chinese philosophy. And then they also comes with groups, and then the beauty of the groups, and the beauty of environment, and then being in harmony with nature. I explore more about the shape. I find out like there's a called Tianyuan Difang. That means like the sky representing circle and then the ground representing square. I found interesting with these two shapes meaning, like because based on the culture reference, this circle and then square elements can be shown as even in time structure, and they can representing a lot of things. So I was used because the term was used by the ancients to describe the structure of heaven and then earth. So I feel very interesting to that shape. So then I developed from that to my design criteria. It's like my style would be neo-Chinese style furniture, inspired by the philosophy concept of the Tianyuan Difang and then the human and natural being as one. And the characters will be simplicity, functional, and linear, and decorative. And the shape will mainly focus on the circle and then square. The material, I will just like focus in using the natural materials. So based on that, I did some concept ideation drawings. From that, I developed from three different concepts. One is just like the circle is just straightforward, circle representing sky and then square representing the ground. And then the second concept is the reflection, water reflection. So I just like adding some reflection kind of in the between, so have a horizontal line. And then the third one is like the water reflection of the nature and then the human being as one. So from the stool, I developed from the stool and then develop a full set of dressing set. So including a set of screen divider, because and a vanity with light and with mirror and a stool. So I want to create a nice environment for people like to finding your own beauty and then to just discover yourself. So this is my first mock-up. So as you can see, because today I don't have the mirror ready, so the final will look similar to like this with LED lighting. And then the highlights of the project is like I learned how to make a full circle with Peter to do the big circle and then the small circle. and also how to do the stone top, and then doing some detail of the drawer front. Yeah, that's it. So, yeah. And for my screen, I want to show some. So there's a variation for the screen. I found that it's like I want to do some movement. So I designed the screen to be rotatable and it's playful. And then also they can put different angle, and then they can just like changeable, even like just like normal screen, or you can do something like something like this. And then it's like they can create, so it kind of, I feel like because the circle and then square doesn't limit themselves, the square can cover the circle, and then the circle can also cover the square. So I would just don't want to limit themselves to one shape. And then the drawer front, I just using some simple decorative elements for the representing the Ming Dynasty that I like. I don't want too much decoration to take away the whole simplicity. And it should have a mirror at the back. So something will look like this. Yeah, but there's no mirror at the moment, which I will be adding on later. Just give you a sense of what it looks like in the whole set. And before, I was also learning from the research that usually Chinese screen comes with 1, 2, and 4. Usually like this number. So that's why I made myself a very hard time to making four parts, like many parts of screens. The hardest part for my project is, I think, is time, because these small parts take a lot of time to do the joinery and then everything.
Maybe while Andrew's
Yeah, I can see.
inspecting, I'll just speak
Yeah,
a
you
little
can
bit.
say-
more.
you can say,
That's good.
it's suitable. No, it's suitable. I just see the seat tilted, so I just want to worry you. No, you can say. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, yeah, sorry.
I think you're just I think everyone recognizes you're kind of a force of nature. And if you don't know what the context is, you'll figure it out later. You've worked so incredibly hard and frenetically to get all of these pieces together, but very, very consistently as well. And it's, I'm really incredibly impressed at the collection that you've been able to put together. There's a lot of complexity in these things, but quite apart from how hard you worked, I think the pieces look very coherent all together. It's a good arrangement of pieces, but the screen is so interesting when you talked about that balance between, heaven and earth, and that sort of sense of the porosity between those two places, and the way the screen moves around, the way Andrew is working on it now, where it becomes solid and then not solid, and it's so much more interesting than any of the images that you made of it. So I think having the anticipation of what you wanted to achieve and creating that, it's just really nice to see it all together as it is. Lots of little parts, and you acknowledge that that takes a lot of time. Sometimes, though, I am just thinking about the hinges being so visible. I think, maybe if you can,
I will
paint,
fix that
spray
later.
paint them black or something like that, because you
Mhm.
really want to see those independent pieces.
Yeah.
And I think the detail on the drawer front, The subtle relief that you put cutting in and leaving that outside edge proud, it really does carry through the sense of that Ming heritage, but in a very, a much more subtle way than it otherwise might have been. So I think you've really created a great balance and achieved the goal you wanted to, even if the pieces aren't all done. So it's been really fun and inspiring to see how hard you worked on this whole thing.
Yeah, thank you. You can sit.
Yeah,
Okay.
just to second everything that Peter said. The hinges stand out, but you can
I will
remove
yeah.
the lacquer from them and give them a bit of patina. And otherwise, just an incredible kind of powerhouse set of stuff. Really great.
Thank you.
Is the mirror gonna have a light still?
Yeah, I already installed the LED switches, but just like no mirror at the moment, so I just don't want to rush it.
And I just want to say about, I know that you worked hard in the last few weeks on your process document and collecting your thoughts. And I know it's a challenge because a lot of your research was done in Chinese, like in your language. And I think that you summarized today, the conceptual foundation of this project really nicely. I think it was very succinct. The 3 questions that you posed and presented made a lot of sense to the work that you're presenting today. So well done on that.
Thank you.
I would just say that for me, you've created something that feels very, very contemporary in some ways. It also feels like it can be translatable outside of a neo-Chinese tradition that you've been discussing, and that I appreciate your use of sort of some very basic primary geometric shapes. You've taken the circle and the circles in the screen. Obviously, we can see through them, but for me, that reads a bit of as a relief, and then that relief is into the drawer fronts. There's the way you've addressed the cushion on the stool, which relates to the screen. There's just it's evident that you've really put a lot of thought into this, but still use some basic forms and shapes that doesn't necessarily, for me, classify this only in one stream or one world of, and I can see people having something like this who aren't necessarily have an interior that has to be classified as wanting neoclassical or neo-Chinese furniture. So it's really well done. And not to harp on it, but yes, I agree with the hinges.
Yeah.
Or in the very least, just it would be good if the screws were brass.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So then if in that regard, but not nitpicking, but those are the little, go all the way. But yes, if they were, but apart from that, and I'd be interested to see how you address the mirror.
Yeah.
I mean, right now you have it as a solid backing on it.
Yeah.
But when you held it up, there's to me a exploration as to whether or not everything that's above is your mirror and everything that below is actually open again, similar to what you've done on your screen. So there is that missing, you still have your frame, but you can see through it. However, there are privacy panels on furniture. So are you incorporating the idea of some sort of privacy panel there? Because it is a dressing table and stuff.
Yeah, I was thinking just cover it up.
So
yeah, covering up. Oh yeah, but
open the rendering, was it? Okay.
Yeah, it was open before, but then I was thinking for the construction, and then I might need to hide some like electrical stuff there, so I won't just like leave it closed. Yeah, soft clothing. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. 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 Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it should be soft closing. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, it's just like I don't want to be too white. It's like when people are thinking about marble or stone or something, they would pick pretty white. I just want to using like the ground color, like ground color, and then just fade a little bit. So that's why I picked this kind of like a type of stone.
I mean, I think in the end, the palette of materials that you chose work really well. And they also reference, I know, some of the different concepts that you went through and make a good reference to uh, the natural environments, I guess. you would
Yeah.
say.
And also because of the material wood I choose is like ash, kind of the yellowish, so I don't want to be too white and then suddenly become yellow. Any question? No? Thank you so much.
All right, so this is my thesis presentation. Just- so my area of interest for the Capstone project is material exploration. So I've used fabric, cable, and metal to create a multi-material piece of furniture. Architecture and engineering are used as a secondary inspiration to inform the ways the materials can be used effectively in a piece of furniture. The types of structures I looked at are tensile structures, bridges, cantilevers. The final outcome aims to create comfortable seating for the user that is visually and technically dynamic. So my research, just 2 points to highlight. One was being influenced in the way the tensile structures have evolved. And this started with looking at yurts, which use string for portability and rigidity in the structure. This gave me a goal to make a piece of furniture that was held together by the tension of the fabric, partially held together by the tension of the fabric, being pulled around the frame by the cables that can easily be detached, allowing for the components to come apart easily. The second is German architect and structural engineer Frei Otto's fascination with lightweight tensile forms. I share this interest and tried to pull from common forms made in tensile structures to recreate them in different fashions, to experiment with forms and the volumes of empty spaces, the empty space that they create. So just some explorations. These tests, I was trying to push the boundaries of forms that I was familiar with through my research, just like the basic forms. With these tests, I tried to use the cable to pull the fabric as well as the wooden dowels just to pull it in different directions. This went into just some small scale models. So I developed several small scale models to test the potential ways the fabric would wrap around the frame. This led to a design I could use for a mock-up and proof of concept. So my mock-ups, after creating a sturdy structure, I was able then to create test seat samples to develop a pattern that fit well on the frame and could could support the weight of a person. So manufacturing, because it is supposed to just come apart easily, the metal has hardware on it that can just be loosened, and then they come apart and the fabric lifts off. The hardware I use, so the first one on the left there is just a piece of metal that's attached to the wire, it's secured to the wire so that it can't be loosened or moved in any way. And so what I did was I fed the wire with that end through the tube, so that I could attach the different hardware, which would attach to the fabric. Just a chair rendering sections of the front leg and how the hardware works. And then, yeah, the final.
Could you just, with the chair as a reference, kind of describe the various structural elements and how they go, just so we get a clear kind of.
Yeah, so at the back, the wires pulling on it were meant to maintain the seat form, even if someone wasn't sitting in it. I think when I was ideating, there was a lot of examples where fabric had just been stretched right over a structure and it wasn't necessarily implied that it was seating. So this was a way to sort of tie in tensile structures and imply what the use was.
And how about the one that goes across the front and around the back?
Yeah, so the one that goes across the front is pulling the fabric over that front bar, which also gives tension to the.
It's not sleeved on the front bar, or is it?
So there's a piece that I have in the pattern that just that front bar feeds through, but it doesn't actually give it the rigidity. of the wire. Because I was trying to convey the idea of a tensile structure rather than a sling chair, and a lot of people seem to think that it was a sling chair if I didn't have it pulling on the fabric.
Confuses me a bit there, that part, just because it seems the wire is doing exactly the same thing as the bar. Am I misunderstanding what's happening there?
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Point, I don't think you need to worry about the tension there, because the fabric is an element in itself and it is working in tension as soon as somebody sits in it, right? Like it's being stretched from its various anchor points, you know?
Yep.
Like, I mean, just if that's the concern.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, where it's kind of like, okay, it is duplicating a function in some ways.
Oh, yeah.
But it does, in an interesting
Yeah, it's all
way,
good.
kind of add an extra detail to the thing that brings it into the realm of your mind anyway, of a tensegrity structure or a tensile structure. It's definitely comfortable to sit in. It's
I also like to add very comfortable. I'm curious, like the decision to leave the ends of the legs flat. What was kind of,
Kind of just like the pitch it came out at. It was tough
Okay.
to get the metal bent perfectly the way I wanted. So
okay,
I kind of had to compromise a little on the front leg pitch, but yeah, they were initially supposed to be completely like tapered, like angled top and bottom.
okay. I don't mind them in contrast in terms of like the angle, like even if they were just parallel to the floor,
Mm.
I think they're kind of nice, like even if they were domed, I feel like they'd be really nice tactile elements to then get up off of. Like, I think, yeah, just in terms of like getting up and out, and then also just when you're in it, you're very like, you are very relaxed. I feel like there's kind of like this nice relationship with the legs when you're sitting on it. So, great, it's great.
The backing is a sail cloth. It it was advised that I use it to do the whole seat, but I just didn't really like the material in the end that much, but it adds rigidity to the fabric.
And that, in the intent, the reason the advice for that material was because it would provide
For the sail fabric?
for the sail fabric, correct? Yeah,
Because there's no stretch in it.
gotcha.
So over time, it wouldn't give.
Found sitting in it, like that front bar going across is cutting into me a little bit. Like, it's just so I'm not sure if it's the height of it, if it's my legs. I'm assuming it's probably a bit to do with the height and the placement of it. I think Cody was just saying, when you're sitting in it, it's nice to have that wooden, because there is this synthetic material to it, and then there is the wooden posts at the front, and sitting there and having my hands on there, I looking at it, I don't notice it. Sitting there, I did notice it more. I noticed it from a design and the aesthetics, but sitting there and having my hands on the wood in the chair, and also hearing that crinkly synthetic sound, I appreciated having the wood there. There's an interesting contrast in the scale of your parts. Was there an intention to that, and in terms of the diameter of the tubing, and then the scale of your wooden element?
Not entirely. I mean, I think I was kind of pushed to make them smaller, just as small as I could, but I kind of I think I'd make them larger if I were to do it again personally. I just like the large element on the front compared to the delicate, kind of looking frame. But that's a personal thing, I guess. I think the hardware as well, like those back hooks, would have been nicer to be smaller.
I was just gonna say the thickness of the front legs almost draws to, I know you use sail fabric and it might just be my background, but it looks like bollards or cleats for a dock, and mixed with I'm assuming that's airplane wire you're using, the high tension cable, it looks like halyards on a boat as well, plus with the sailcloth. I could see this almost becoming a themed chair or something like that, where you could say market it for like an area like that almost, or you could change the fabric, change the front, and then market it towards a different area, because it's definitely customizable in that manner. And I lost my train of thought. No, I really like the boldness of the front legs. I think you're right in thinking that maybe what would it look like bigger, perhaps. It's really interesting.
I'm just back to that front detail again. I think I'm figuring it out where you're coming from, because that bar is necessary not to support the fabric, but it's in compression, right? Because that cable. So if you move the bar down even a few inches, then you would lose that kind of hardness under your knees, and also the structural separation be there visually in the piece. I think like everything else is so kind of didactic and obvious, and you can feel the tension and how things working, and then it kind of gets squeezed together at that point. And it's also, as Andrew pointed out, a bit of a comfort issue in the thing, maybe. So to possibly separate that, you would probably have to control the force down, maybe it could go through the wood leg and kind of sling across as a cable. I don't know if that'd be more or less comfortable in the end, but just to separate your structure and make every move, whether it's a tensile, element or a compressive element, just kind of be separate and be able to read. It would be an improvement, right?
Mhm.
Move the bar down like you're suggesting. Continue that look, right?
In earlier renderings, did you ever have, I could be mistaken, did you have the cable going drilled through, like have a hole piloted through, but the cable went into the leg once upon a time?
Yeah, I had the fabric kind of going into the leg and wrapping through it to give it that support. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting how Declan described it as the potential for making a theme kind of thing. And I think that it's actually what that would really be called would be having the concept and the market for that project. And we talked a bit also about the idea of when you were contemplating sailcloth, that it was something that, had a very particular aesthetic that would respond to a certain clientele base, and it's totally right. I think, and I wish there was some way to describe this as something non-binary, but this has a very masculine quality to it. It's something that has a kind of gear-driven solutions that would be very, like, it seems like there's a certain class of guys that are really interested in how these interfaces work, and a lot of them would be sailors or CEOs or so I think there is a kind of a draw to that market segment somehow, and I think the contrast between the scale of the wood elements and the metal and the fabric, it's a very sort of soft, kind of almost lavender pinky tone, which might be a curious choice for that particular market, but I think you're trying to, you said you didn't really have a justification for the scale of the parts, but there is something about the extremity of the contrast that also is sort of, it's loud and proud in the way that creates this sort of masculine kind of quality, and I just think it's so so interesting to see how I think you make decisions much less how to describe it, they're less arbitrary than you are willing to admit. And I think if you are able to sort of say, okay, this is what I'm about, and this is how I do things, and make a conscious decision behind, or a justification of the design decisions you make, I think you'd be far more empowered in your design process as well. So I think it does have a particular aesthetic and a particular market. It has some false steps in terms of how it's translating its structure. I think that's something you can certainly work on, but it has a very particular aesthetic that that could find a market, but I think you really need to resolve all the fine details that still need consideration there. I want to see that fabric, taught as a drum, so that I can really see what's happening with those forces and so on. And whether it's something that actually needs stretch or whether it's something that just needs to be designed to within an inch of its life as a high performance sailboat would be. I think that's the opposite approach to it. And that's where I think you would really have an amazing project where it really is just, carbon fibered all to hell, just make it part of that aesthetic that you're sort of scratching at, if you know what I mean.
And finish the back of it.
Oh, yeah. Well, that
Yeah, I was just trying to incorporate the sail fabric because it seemed important.
So hello, for all of those of you who don't know me, my name is Mackenzie, and my capstone I've called Memphasizing. And the term memphasizing is the act of taking traditional shaker ideology and forms and incorporating the Memphis approach to design through the use of color, adjusting scale, extruding forms while focusing on their common design elements, which include balanced geometric shapes and clean, simple forms. So this is just a little bit of a mind map of kind of how I was able to tie the two movements together. Although they seem very far apart, there was some connecting ideas, design elements that I kind of found. And from my research, I kind of got my criteria, which was suitable for production, engage the user in a fun and playful manner, use simple geometric forms, color, scale, and extrusion, be asymmetric yet visually balanced, and combine machining and handcraft. So my first object's the side table. So I started off by looking at traditional candle stand side tables that the shakers had. From there, I was sketching and kind of came up with this idea here. You can see that's circled. Through sketch models and scale models, I kind of came to this form. Originally, I did want to start with a shaker form, go to Memphis, then go back to shaker. So originally I had tapered legs and the little ring of color on the side table, which was tied back to the shaker ladder back chair. However, through crit in the fall, people were suggesting it looked like Hudson's Bay. And with the colors that I chose now, I saw a little bit more primary to it, which could also lead to the Hudson's Bay. So I kind of avoided that. I guess also with the side table, the center is off-centered to kind of fit over top of the legs as they grow in size and in width out of the center. And the base is machined on the indexer, which was a really fun process to learn. So next is the peg rail. So I kind of started sketching, playing with scale. However, it was very much childlike, and I did want to avoid that. So I kind of went to a cone form, playing with different shapes of that and different sizes. I did kind of start with this kind of idea of cartooning the kind of traditional shaker peg form, and then also playing with the back rail form. However, I did want to stay true to shaker by having this long, straight back panel or back rail that wasn't really played with. So just kind of playing with the form and sizing of the peg positionings, which kind of led me to where I am now with the different sizes, kind of going off of the, prime numbers of 2, 3, 5, and 7, which I just find very fun. Moving on to the bench. So with the bench, I kind of struggled a bit at the beginning, kind of looking at the Windsor style bench and their other bench. After going through a lot of the sketch models, I really looked at it to see what I was really drawn to each one. And it was really much this kind of ball or other floating upholstery kind of form on it, which led me to this bench here, which is literally just one of the half circle legs flipped around to create the cutout of the bench. And I wet felted and needle felted the ball that sits in it. It took about 32 hours, but it's done. It looks great. And I originally had this kind of design of the under rail going down at an angle, but I did want to explore different forms of that and possibilities. So I kind of spent a whole day of exploring different ways I could kind of incorporate Memphis and Shaker more within that piece, because it's very much Shaker on one half, Memphis on the other. So I went through this kind of exploration, but didn't really like any way I was going. So ended up just kind of staying true to the form I have now. I was originally going to have to kind of tie back to the craft that is Shaker on the bench by having through tenons of the legs come through. However, it was a little too busy in drawings and kind of mock-ups that I did, that I kind of avoided the square and circle contrast and just did through joinery on the sides of the tenons of the rail. And moving on to the chair was very much, I'm not going to say last minute, but I kind of came up with it over Christmas through my ancillary study using the indexer. I had a lot of fun with doing offsets and kind of seeing the limitations of the CNC. So I kind of played around with different ways of separating the chair. I originally wanted to kind of tie in the swallowtail joint that the Shakers do on their boxes, but kind of soon turned away from that. I originally had a very balanced look to it, but going back to my criteria, kind of doing an asymmetric feel. And I did a little finial study, as the Shakers, a lot of the villages had their own kind of form that they stayed to. My favorite was like kind of the candle flame, but I did want to go back to Memphis by simplifying that form even more and staying true to a geometric shape by doing a complete sphere. Yeah, and at first I had limitations with the indexer. When it's on the y-axis, it can only go to about 37 inches, which is the height of this chair here. And I wasn't overly, I don't want to say pleased with it, but it wasn't very much reading Shaker. It was still very short compared to some of the really tall ladder back chairs. So Peter helped me out. We kind of tore apart the CNC like Vesper did, and made a jig to fit on the new indexer to go up to almost the whole length of the x-axis. So we built the jig by taking off the backup board and plenum board and just sticking on this jig to get the right clearance for the CNC bit. That's kind of it now. Yeah. The ball is removable, which I find really fun, and it ends up kind of bouncing. But anyways, yeah. There's a small, about 6-inch styrofoam core, and the rest is felted. Yeah, go for it. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it is. You can sit on it. You can sit on it. It's okay. Just be gentle. Just be gentle. I do wish I kind of worked out a little bit more on the chair, kind of coming up with the idea over Christmas and then kind of being restricted with the indexer. I kind of not lost passion in it, but as soon as I was given the possibility of making it taller. So I just wish I had more time to develop it a bit more, but just with the understructure, I think proportionally with different either thicker or thinner rail sizes, I don't know, I just think it needs a little bit more refining. Yes. Yes. Yeah, no, that's okay. And it is at a 90-degree, and it is a traditional kind of shaker chair. So I do wish I could spend more time on potentially making it a little bit more comfortable, potentially maybe making it a lounge chair for the future. I don't know. Thank you. Yeah. But yes. Yeah. So I first started with just kind of having off the pieces kind of being over top of each other and kind of cutting, shifting. But Vance kind of suggested potentially playing with it a bit more. So I kind of having that slide down and shift, kind of locking it a bit more was nice. And potentially if I was to do it with them stacking, I could do it on the lathe, but this way it's really much restricted to just using the indexer.
Well, I'd love to be at the opening where you present these pieces and you invite the shakers and the Italians. And then, but honestly, I think they'd all be just kind of amused by it because you have struck this balance I thought I'd never see between those two vastly different.
Yeah.
I guess we're all in between them, right? We're not shakers, and we're not these crazy Italians from the 60s either. We're flying that, but you've kind of brought these two extremes together and in a kind of tasteful way. I can't quite believe it, but
I still think there's water in that because I only used about 18 grams of felt and it's weighing at about 2,000 or not 1,800 grams, sorry, it's about weighing about 2,000 grams. So I think there's still water in that. But it was sitting in the heat box for about 2 hours or 2 days.
It'll dry out during the grad show, I'm sure.
Yes. Oh, yes, it's bleached ash. And I really wanted to play with the contrast because I knew I wanted to use color. So I didn't want the wood to be too overpowering. So kind of whitewashing it and toning it down was kind of the goal. And I did different finishing samples with oak, bleaching it, what else? A bunch of other things. And it came to ash. Peter, I think, suggested ash. And it was nice with the grain detail that kind of plays to the Memphis as they use patterns with their kind of designs. Which, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. Okay, I've rambled on a bit.
And then the colors that you showed.
Yes, the colors. That was like a whirlwind of, I went through about, I think, felt like 50 different color schemes at one point, but I kind of landed on these 4 colors. The pink was really from, I did kind of some research on where people think the future of colors are going for like 2022, 2023, and this bright, vibrant pink was one of them, paired with this dark green, and green is one of my favorite colors, so I did know I wanted to use a green, and I just kind of found that the blue paired kind of quite nicely, and with the green, and then the contrasting color of blue is the orange, which is the vibrant, and the pink and orange are kind of more of the vibrant colors that lead to more Memphis, where the neutral toned down colors of the blue and green are more shaker. But that's kind of how.
Looking at this, did you ever come across a project called Designing Utopia?
Furnishing Utopia?
Furnishing Utopia.
Yes, I did.
Great.
Love them.
That's the one.
Love that.
That's it. It's good because it would be, I would say there's merit here for what you've created to make sure that they know of what you've done, because it would be in keeping with what that project is about.
Yeah.
I don't know where status of it any longer.
Yeah, they've moved kind of away from shaker to more of this. It was more of a, I don't want to say pop art, but kind of colors based, less furniture, more art based. The last exhibit, but
I think
yeah.
they did sketches and drawings.
Yes, yeah.
But there are there's other people from the program who have done work
Oh.
a lot from years ago, who came, John Sabine, I think, guys from Toronto, MSBS. Pretty sure they did a piece that was in that line and
Cool.
when they showed, but anyways, it reminds me very much of that sort of reinvestigating that time. I honestly don't have any idea at all about, I know what Memphis was.
Yes.
One thing you didn't point out, you brought up Shaker, but you didn't, it would have been great if you had told us a little bit about just, even if it's a one-word thing, what is Memphis? Because you described it as Memphisizing,
Yes.
but for me, to be honest, I actually don't
Don't
have a lot
know.
of insight into what Memphis is, so I'll look after.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
from the presentation side, it would have been great to just sort of
More.
given a little background first as to what Memphis is, so then I know what the izing part of it
For
would
sure.
have meant.
Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah. Yes.
I can just add that one thing that's been lovely to watch over the term, Mackenzie, is I think one, you kind of hit your stride at the perfect point in your education here, like coming in a fourth year, and the breadth that you applied, like you went wide with all of your ideation and concept searches and material, you really dug in, and it really shows because you have a very cohesive body of work that I think could set you up to continue working in this method for some time. You've really landed on something interesting here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with Kirsten. It's been fun watching all of the tests and deliberations you've made that are always seem to be very conscious, even if they're like tiny variations from here to here.
Yes.
It's but sometimes that's what you got to do. You picked a very challenging project that kind of made no sense until it made complete sense, and so Scott's right. It's that kind of clash of those two, diametrically opposed design approaches that you've really been able to inhabit in a kind of an interesting way. The chair has such value because it's actually way more understated and subtle than any of the other pieces, and so it poses its own challenges. And structurally, I think it just started to happen just a little too late to really investigate
yeah.
how to make it
Yes.
solid enough.
Definitely.
And if you really wanted to do yourself a favor, you'd cut it apart and use the back to reformat the structure and make it really solid. But I think as a grouping, seeing all those pieces together with the chair hung up there, Andrew's got a really good point in terms of, even if if this Furnishing Utopia group has moved on from where they were, this isn't a lifetime's work to continue to mine the intersections between Shaker and Memphis. This is something that allows you a framework to move on with the same level of integrity that you've shown this year to whatever else you want to apply your skills to. So, and any curator or artist group or design community would understand that. So it's definitely worth just, you should just publicize the shit out of this as much as you can in a savvy way with the right people, because that's what's going to really allow you to do whatever you want for whatever your next project is. And that's going to be the challenge. It's like, the follow-up album,
we're all mining work that's already been done. But many students will say, hey, I'm really influenced by this particular designer or this particular period, and how do I develop work in that vein and bring my own voice to it? And it's interesting, sort of this mashup, because it's really forced you to understand what the key salient points of each of those design periods were, and to understand them, more completely through juxtaposing them with another, time. And it's managed to maintain the subtlety of Shaker, but the vibrancy of nice balance. And in some ways, it almost feels like you couldn't have done it unless you put these two together. In a way.
Right.
To try to make Memphis light, it's a hard thing to try. So, I think it's just how you try to define what it is that appeals to you about a certain kinds of furniture and certain styles, and bring those forward.
Thank you. Yeah.
So for my thesis, I've been designing a collection, as you can see. My main aspect of this is to bring art and value into everyday life where there wouldn't be any elsewhere. So very first year, I made this mallet, and Jonah said that it was way too pretty to hammer things on. The first thing I did was go and hammer stuff with it because it's a mallet and it's meant to be used. And that really made me think. Ever since then, it's been in the back of my mind that we never really use valuable things to us. And the prettier something is, the more valuable we make it, and then the less we want to use it. So no one wears their Rolex when they go out hiking. No one wears their $200 dress shirt when they go to the beach. But why not? You buy these things to use them, to enjoy them, and yet we hide them away and squirrel them away in small places and only take them out during exciting or extravagant events. So coupled with that, as our living spaces are becoming smaller and smaller, we don't have the room to display these kinds of pieces, and we don't have the room for, say, a formal dining room or an extra set of chinaware that you'd bring out for guests or you'd only use 3 times a year. Why can't you culminate those together and create pieces what you are proud to use, proud to be around, and still use them every day rather than save them for smaller occasions? And through this, I wanted to really use the color and the patterns found in wood to really emphasize that and to create, rather than like a painted art, a more created, crafted art. So I've been creating a medium in which I have been cutting my pieces out of. So the most traditional thing you probably first think of when you look at this is Yosengi Zaku, which is Japanese marquetry, from which there are 2 main forms, zuku and muku. Zuku is when you plane, like take a big plane and take off small shavings and veneers of a larger seed board. So for instance, you would have, say, this stool pan, and you'd be able to cut, say, 200 sheets out of it. And then you'd be able to use that to create a larger yield. And then there is muku marquetry, which is more what you see with my smaller vases and things like that. It's more creative, where you create a seed board, which is the main patterned block, and then you turn it or sculpt something out of that, which is a lot less common because it is a lot more expensive, and it's a lot more expensive. So the main reason that I wanted to be doing that, the muku marquetry, is the way geometric forms bend over curved surfaces. So a few years ago, I made a cutting board where I put a blood groove in, and just standing back and seeing where the grain goes and then dips having that little swoop just from a different perspective kind of caught my eye. And here we can see the vase over there. Just from the actual form progression as it goes, it'll change the surface topography and how it actually physically looks. Another, for instance, this vase here, these lines, these are all straight lines. All I did was cut 2 X's, cut it 2 X's, and then turned through that, you create the weave. So moving on. So what I was just mentioning, the fact that things curve and cup over curved surfaces, I did a lot of exploration in the beginning of the year for that, and I call it 2 plane intersections. So as the example, when 2 curved planes intersect on opposing angles, the intersection line, which is right here, is the result is either an ellipse or a sphere or a circle, sorry. And then depending on how, where you put that curve on the other curve, how big the curve, if you add a 3rd curve, the options are endless. So I was really intrigued on how I could capture that and take advantage of it and put it into multiple pieces. So to start with that, I actually had to figure out how to make patterns. And I came into this year not knowing anything about patterns. So to create patterns, basically it's just 1 or 2 single pieces, which you repeat, add, and then keep repeating bigger sections. And then for this instance, this piece would create a bigger block from what you would cut down and then add into here. And then that tessellated outwards would equal a larger pattern. It's really confusing to kind of explain. I'll spend a lot of hours just on the computer breaking apart patterns and trying to figure out how to properly manufacture them. So these are a bunch of just samples that I was doing. These are all up here. These are all the samples. Each and every one of these patterns are extrudable and means that I could do something like this stool, or I could make a larger seed board. So I could take any of these patterns and expand them into any of these pieces. It's just I chose the more simple hexagon 3D cube pattern just for manufacturing purposes, because it's a lot quicker considering it's just one shape. It's just a single rhombus, from which then you would take 3, glue them together into a hexagon, wrap them up, sand them down, and then you'd be able to glue those together again and form single pieces. So I did a lot of string and glue ups. In each of those tiny little vases at the front and the garniture, there's about 273 pieces in a single vase. So moving forward to the stool, because I know I wanted to, because mostly these pieces are more akin to smaller tabletop items. I wanted to push myself and create an actual piece of furniture, something that could be used. So I know that I wanted to do a stool because from the back of my mind, ever since the beginning of the year, even since last year, I've wanted to make a milking stool, to just completely juxtapose the fine arts mixed with taking it and throwing it in a pile of manure and milking a cow. So these stools were designed for that purpose, to be dirty, to get used, to get absolutely destroyed, because that's what I made them for, and that's what I'd hope people to use them. Sorry, I got off topic. The radial patterns, these were just from a single pattern block from one of those. And I can create endless different patterns from that just by different book matching, keeping it patterned, different size wedges in the circle, because each of these are created of pie pieces from which are tessellated around. And these 8 are just from one pattern, and I could make millions. So it was really hard to narrow it down and simplify it into something achievable, something not overly busy per se. Like I know some people still find that quite busy. So I had simplified the pattern a lot. So I went back to the 3D cube pattern from where I was able to take that And then since it all worked out because since each angle on those cubes are a 30 or 60 degree angle, I created a 30-degree wedge. So there's 12 wedges in that stool top, which means that each wedge is 30 degrees and each relation is 60 degrees. So when you put two wedges together, further, you can see that on each wedge is a 90-degree relation. So where is it, wedge? So where is it? This is 90 degrees with that. Okay. Where is it? Oh my goodness. That's 90 degrees with that. So it creates more patterns the more you look at it. Further with that, I wanted to really show off how the pattern bends and stretches as it hits that surface. So for the leg, I decided to do a smaller pattern because it's more visible on a smaller section like that is. So as you can see, as it bends over the edge, it stretches and pulls, showing that curve, because that's just one solid piece all the way through. And then as I carved onto the inside, that one thin piece of veneer creates that larger stripe and curve on the inside. Because even though it's a straight edge, having it curved and shaped creates that pattern and creates that sloped inside. So it's straight edge, but the pattern makes it appear as though it's curved. And then I wasn't able to get any pictures of my final piece because I was just getting them done last night, but this would be a tableware collection. So let me just grab a few of these bad boys. These are all vases. They have glass inserts in them, so they can be wet vases. And then all of these, they have the hexagonal pattern, and then they bend and form upwards. So as you step back and look at them, you can witness that grain change. And since these are actually single species, the pattern isn't as pronounced, and it's a lot more calming, more contemporary. So it helps to simplify it a little bit, makes it a bit more calming to the eye. And then this bowl piece is what these all sit around. So this is supposed to be kind of like a, what's the word? Dynamic tableware set where you can move them around and create your own kind of style depending on what you want. So that's how I see them being, but of course people can take them and they can put them together because they're all geometric shapes and they all match. So you can create this kind of landscape, if you will, depending on how you want it, where you want it. And then even on their own, they still hold up one or two together and still hold up as pieces. Thank you, Cody. Yeah, so this small garniture right here, I wanted to do that in full scale, but that would have been an absolute nightmare to have created because it would have taken so much material and so much time, which I did not have. So I decided to make a smaller version. I was able to create a few larger versions. I thought I was going to get a lot more yield out of making those, but unfortunately, I was only able to get 3. Yeah, I don't know. Of course you can sit.
Well, it's a broad and impressive array of objects for sure. And at first glance, I thought, oh, this guy's got busy fingers.
I do.
And that's obviously true. But similarly to Mackenzie before you, it's like you've gone through this aesthetic that we've seen before. You've demonstrated your virtuosity in the craft, but then that virtuosity, it wasn't just like, okay, now I'm going to make 10,000 of these and sell them at craft sales. You became interested in the geometry of it. And I think that's where you really started to bring something, because although I appreciate the stools for their virtuosity, it's still, I still think of craft, and craftspeople, like pure craft tends to be intellectually fairly lazy, maybe, people are buying the 100 or 10,000 craft idea books or whatever, right? So my point is, I think in your final pieces, and now I realize that those are your final pieces, I think you've broken through, at least in some ways, this kind of crafty definition of what you're up to. And turning is we've seen things like this on the back of Fine Woodworking magazine, which is a compliment enough. But I think your vase pieces are back to something being subtle. They also give the end user the ability to do a little bit of that assembly themselves. Like you're giving them just a little bit of that experience that you've done and allowing those things to kind of be constructed on your table. And I think that's a really great thing where it feels to me like you've kind of come through a barrier which is there in craft into a truly kind of creative and more subtle and modern feeling pieces. So,
For sure.
but yeah, how many pieces of wood are on the table right now?
I couldn't tell you.
Busy fingers.
Could not tell you. I mean, in this, there's about 1,000 pieces in there. That's the stool has 444 pieces in it. So there's been a lot of cutting and a lot of gluing and a lot of sanding.
It's nice to see the application of that.
Yeah, it's the one thing that I really wanted to show was the variety of things that I could make with it. Because rather than creating an object, I was more creating a material which I could then put onto any object that I wanted, with limitations, of course. So like for example, I have a guitar, rosettes, I have cutting boards, bowls, vases, wind chimes.
It can be overstimulating as well, right? And I think to find a purity in that that's your own is it's very effective.
I just wanted to say I do like the philosophy of like enjoying everything you have right away, because I think we all know the idea of, saving things for a rainy day. But I think like personally, I believe that like your every day should be a rainy day. And I think you should just like use everything you have like as you want them to. And I think the pieces you've created are beautiful. Do you find with like, again, you said like there's 200 pieces, or like with the suit, do you see them as being pieces that are recreated? Do you see these as like museum pieces? Because as craft workers, I think we know the time and effort goes into something, and then the value that you have to give to them. Do you see yourself like evolving these into pieces that are worth the time you've put into them? Because like I feel like 200 pieces in that vase, people are not going to realize how much effort went into that. Like, how do you see these pieces like evolving, whether you're seeing them to be reproduced or more like a museum? I guess you want them to be used, so they're not really museum pieces.
Right. That's one thing that I've kind of struggled with through this whole thing is, well, as you said, trying to find value in this. Trying to explain to people how I actually go through making it is one thing that's very challenging. So trying to find a way to show each process, to show the time and the effort going into it is something that I need to work on. And maybe that would be like a video or a small PowerPoint or something like that, which I would show at, say, a craft fair or something. But on the terms of the question of where I'd see these living, the stools I see living in a barn personally. But something like this, I could see in more of a gallery space or Obviously, this would be more of like in the center of a table. This could be on a, oh my goodness, on more of a, like a low cabinet. But I really see them anywhere, wherever they seem fit, in any day spaces, in exotic, in a gallery space, and they're really just, they're meant to be used and they're meant to be enjoyed for what they are. So it's really up to the person on how they see it and how they want to interact with it.
Hello. Two things. First, it's so cool to see where you've ended up. I remember first year you were doing this sort of thing, even like first project, just playing with wood, and you're always taking offcuts and making splines, and it's neat to see almost like a consistency in what you've been interested in and how refined it is. But to speak on refining it, exactly what was said before, that I think what you've done is you've created so much that it became kitschy, and you have to be, well, not have to, you do whatever you want, but be more selective on the pieces that you, for this project anyway, show as your final, so that it doesn't overwhelm and almost become just
Right.
like a craft sale.
That was one thing I didn't actually specify, which I actually should have.
Yeah.
This vase collection here is the final collection. So this is what I would be presenting. These are all just other examples of what I could do with the material. So I should have said that a little bit more.
And but this is also you. Like, this is every time we come into this shop, this is you. So I'm just maybe trying to say to be a little bit more selective on the pieces that you are trying to like make into something.
Okay.
Maybe.
Well, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
You go.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to know what you thought was the most successful out of this all. If you had one specific, I know this is your final collection. I'm looking at those vases over there, and I think those, the thin lines are really, really successful and simple, and still, conveys what you're doing here. So if you choose one thing and that's your path, I'm just wondering what that would be in this selection. I guess that's not bad.
I don't see a reason to pick one thing. I see a world of opportunity in each and every one of these pieces. I could expand on everything in here, and I don't have favorites in any of them. I mean, I do enjoy the tricolored rather than the more single species, but I also really enjoy the single species, especially in the bowl for larger pieces. And then over there with the smaller, thinner lines, like that has its time and place as well, depending on the piece, depending on how I'm creating it, because those vases, since I cut through in so many different angles, the wood movement has been quite painful. While, for instance, something like the stool, the wood grain is all in the same direction. So the only thing that would happen is it moves out or inwards and warps slightly on the top, which has 3 legs, so that it would stay stable.
Because you really like so many things, and what you like actually turns into many different objects. So, in choosing, one avenue to go down might help, I don't know, narrow it in. And not that you have to at all, but I think it'd be really interesting because you clearly have such skill and interest in it. How can you hone it in to create a refined, I guess, which is what Scott was saying, refined
Avenue. It would be wood turning. I think wood turning would be, if that's what you meant by that. I did a lot of wood turning. I took a bunch of courses with Paul Ross before I came here, and I'd like to do more when I leave. Because turning is one thing that I've really found a passion for. Just being able to take a chunk and then just watching the gouge just cut through, and then having a piece, you can come straight off the lathe and it's finished. It's quite an interesting way to create.
I just wanted to say, I think this is a great test into a kind of, to Netta's point of like, how do you see, you kind of getting the value out of what you're making. And I think what you've done here is you've developed a bunch of like objects that you have a very much wide knowledge of like how to make them. And you know, roughly, at least I hope you do, how much time each thing kind of took. And you can really take what you learned in all these little objects and like expand on the idea of like people's perception of value. And like, since you know how much time each of these took, be able to like, if you were to scale it up, you'd save X amount of time to then create that pattern again or something. And that, I think, if anything, this project has taught you about how to go about, it's like how you've done all these, and then how to kind of potentially market it to actually make it worth your time. So I think that's great for you.
Yeah, that was one thing that I was really trying to hone in on, was the speed that I could actually create things, which is why I decided to go with this more cube pattern, just due to the production and how fast I could get that out and how repetitive it was. So I could create a large batch and then be able to take those blanks, put them all together at once, because I would be making like 200, 300 sticks at a time. So that'd be 900 pieces of wood. So I could just go into the saw and just rip all of those out at once.
And two, I think scaling things up could potentially change people's perceived value of like, if this vase was bigger, like if there were 4 vases, people's idea of like how much that is increases. And also it saves you a little bit more time because you're not working with these small little pieces of material, working with bigger scales. And I think, to Krista's point, it shifts these little kitschy objects into these kind of like mass scale of like, you hopefully, I would hope, see a little bit more profit in terms of potentially doing something.
No, I'm really interested in making like big vases. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, I think just to follow up on that, you know, you even said your words were, when you're talking about the little vases there, an absolute nightmare to create. You know, like, you know, so you do have to think about the constraints of that and that idea of perceived value and, you know, what makes sense. Like if this were to become your calling card as a craftsperson, it's sad that we don't value these things as much as we should, but that's not, unfortunately, the culture or the marketplace we live in. Like, I thought of you, my neighbors just came back from Spain and they brought us like a little sort of trivet that's all, you know, inlay wood that I'm quite certain they bought at a market for, you know, $5, which is terrible. You know, it's terrible that some craftsperson made that in a very poor income. But just finding your niche within here, you know, and I think those tall vases are a start. Are they the right vehicle? I wonder if something that nests together like that, maybe vases work with the different heights. Maybe it's also a set of candle holders, or, you know, I think I do have from the start been drawn to the more abstract patterns because I think I still can't help but to see other cultures in the sort of really geometric one. I mean, I'm glad to hear you talk about the square and the efficiencies and repeating that form and all the possibilities that offers you. I'm glad to hear you make that realization. But at the same time, that seems more unique to me. Like if you could somehow, with the knowledge you gain, rethink how could I make something like that work given the wood, what I know about wood movement, because I think you can get to some of those forms and they are very unique faster, right? So, but how can you get there given what you know, wood movement, all the constraints that you learned through all this experimentation, through all this material research, right?
Okay.
Just a couple of comments. I think Netta's got really good points in terms of trying to figure out what that market is, but I think there is a market, and you know, one of them is a conduit through a place like the Center for Art and Wood in Philadelphia, which I think I'd sent you the information about that artist who had an exhibition there,
Oh,
which is
wonderful.
using work similar in a figurative way to what you're doing. And so when you look for that that specific market, sort of like what I was talking about with Colin about, that that sort of masculine gear-driven market, whether that's even something that you want or not. It's sort of, if it aligns with your desires, that's how you can leverage the value, because you can't display something like you've got here. Krista's quite right. It's overwhelming. And so I think that's one thing we really need to be aware of, because the connection to collectors that are interested and obsessed with the idea of precision and contrast in wood particularly. It's a very narrow market, but it is there. And that's why this is also coming out of Japan. There is this history of that kind of fetishization of craft that Scott was talking about as well, and that it often is synonymous with a technical proficiency, but a conceptual vacuity. And I think that's where this last sort of series of pieces gets you to a point where it's technically proficient, but it also has a higher purpose rather than just showing its decorative capabilities. And that's what excites me about that. And when you first started showing sketches about that whole series of taller vases, and I'd agree, I think there's something about a vase that's nice, but a candlestick is going to sell more than a vase, which is kind of a curious thought. But I think it's really, trying to rein in the enthusiasm now that you have, that it's not all online, and finding the things that will actually give you that value. But I really like the monochromatic pieces that are made out of elm, where you're just playing off the end grain. And maybe it's just my sort of interest and obsession with, like 1970s dance, teakware, but it feels like it has a purpose beyond just the proficiency. And there's no question that you're proficient. You're also a little bit hard on tools, so we'll let Christina work with you on that. Or no, we don't have to anymore.
Which tools?
No, I'm just thinking about the sanding and the effort you put into every single tool that we have. And sometimes things would explode because of the effort that you put into ensuring that the forms they're so technically challenging, and also very, they need to be perfect in order to withstand what you're trying to do. You just stretch the limits of the possibility. That's all I'm saying.
Most of what I thought I might say has been said, which is great, by everybody contributing, because for me, from a presentation, from someone coming to look at today's work, it would be great to have seen this laid out as a progression. Because I very much know from having being a teacher in first year that the wheels are always turning, and one thing leads to another, and there's another idea and another idea and another. And to find out at the end of the presentation that this is the tail end, but I don't actually know how the rest of this,
Right.
where the rest of it came together. Would it be nice, just so I could get a context as to which idea led to which idea. And I have seen this type of work before, and so have you and others in craft shows. And if having it here, I'm looking at it more closely now as we're going through it, and realizing that I'm finding that because you spent so much time in thinking about this, the pieces that I'm finding.
Mhm. Okay. Right.
patterns you're trying to create, and then the method that you're going to employ on it afterwards is turning, which you're going to inherently turn, creating grounded, soft objects. I'm not sure now that I see everything that perhaps these types of forms, these geometric ones, lend as well to it, whereas in these flat or trivet type patterns, they seem to make sense.
Right.
Or in the cutting boards, or in other, or in all of these ones here where you're showing that pattern, whereas in these turned objects here, there's a softness to it. However, I'm still, and the ones over here as well. Hence the reason I kind of would like to have known how you move through it.
Right, right.
Just so I can get a sense as to which one got to where. But I can appreciate the amount of parts here overall.
I can try to walk you through where I started to where I ended if you would.
I would say you can do that after with me. I think probably we have to keep going.
My name's Vance. My capstone's titled Wooden Narcotic. So I set out at the beginning of the capstone to explore seating for older adults. When I thought of seating for older adults, what came to mind were overstuffed cushioned recliners or sterile institutional plastic furniture. There's also a personal tie-in with the fact that I have arthritis, and so I empathize with older adults because I feel 75, I act 25, and so it's just natural that I'm 50. So looking into the market, I asked, like, what do we know about the older adult market? So in a report called Aging by the United Nations, they said that the adult group over 65 is the largest growing segment of the population in the world, and that by 2050, 1 in 4 persons, or 25% of people in Europe and North America, will be over the age of 65. The Arthritis
Take a nap. Vance around Victoria.
Okay. Can you, yep, you can hear me. Great. So as we get older, we can become ill or have impairments with arthritis. And while we typically think of that as being with older people, currently 1 in 5 Canadians are afflicted with some form of arthritis. 40% of those have pain that affects their daily lives, and 1 in 5 people with arthritis are more likely to feel mobility issues. This number is projected to increase to 1 in 4, or 25% of Canadians by the year 2040. As I mentioned before, we know the style and look of seating designed for older adults can certainly be improved. And during my research, I looked into rocking chairs and found that rocking chairs have been shown in a study by the University of Rochester's School of Nursing to have benefits in a study they did for dementia patients. They found that with rocking, the anxiety and depression of their patients was reduced, and those who rocked the most actually benefited from improved balance and have requested less daily medication. And so I decided to move forward with a rocking chair. And so my capstone objective has been to develop a rocking chair for older adults that provides them with safety, comfort, and dignity. Additionally, a good rocking chair for older adults will be a good chair for all adults. President Kennedy had a bad back, and his doctor prescribed for him the use of a rocking chair, as the motion would help alleviate his back pain. And it was that doctor that termed it the wooden narcotic. Here's the series of criteria I set out for myself: to be comfortable and safe, challenge and develop my drawing skills, be seating for a living room or great room, provide the health benefits of rocking, easy to get in and out of, must be elegant. I wanted to consider small batch production, so to make something that could be repeatable, that's usable by a large number of people. And given the target demographic of the older adults, to also consider it for smaller spaces such as condos or suites in nursing homes. So these are some initial ideas. And no, Andrew, my drawing has not improved over the 4 years. But what I quickly found out is that I didn't want a rocking chair where you just cut the legs short on a chair and stick them on a pair of rockers and off you go. I liked where the frame of the chair really formed like an integral element of the rocker. So it was when I moved into the model stages that I came across the idea of trying to use one radius for all the parts of the side frame of the chair. And so I settled on the 42-inch radius, and this was the original, bottom right presentation model. So from that model, we moved on to the first prototype here. So all the elements in this chair of the frames are the same 42-inch radius piece, just shifted and cut differently. It wasn't perfect. It needed updated. The armrests were too short, the chair was too long, and the seat was too high. So move forward to prototype number 2. We've shortened the length, which also eliminates a tripping hazard of the point sticking out the back. Moved the seat further back into the chair, lowered it, added a lumbar support, and got the longer armrests. And this is basically the design that you see here before us now. I also explored a footstool. This one ended up being a little wide, and was encouraged to bring it shorter to try and make it visually sort of line up with the front leg of the chair. In terms of the production and the craft elements of it, in the top left-hand corner, this chair and footstool have 32 pieces. 30 of them were made in that one form, the other 2 being the side of the back. So it was a very easy, repeatable process. And then these are some of the jigs that were used on the table saw. And then an element of the frame is that it's tapered from the outer edge of the curves towards the inner. And so this is me on the shaper jig, going through and adding a taper. So you can see the before and after of the taper. As a little sidebar, we videoed me on the shaper and we're up to almost 300,000 views on Instagram. So look out. What? Oh yeah, 1,300 followers. So I've titled this series Cain and Abel. So it's it's Cain because it's obviously made out of cane. It's Cain because cane is a walking aid. And with my arthritis, my first couple of years or weeks of high school, I had to use a cane to walk around. The footstool is called Abel because hopefully from the rocking, your balance will improve and you'll become more able to move around. And also I was able to make this. And so I feel really good about that. Thank you. And then in the biblical reference, Cain murdered Abel. So this is like Cain coming on and attacking Abel. And yeah, the humors remain too. Oh, yeah, the cushion's a memory foam pillow. I sewed the bolster, and I resolved the brass bar from falling out by just putting these eyelets really tight to hold it in place. So it's not coming out. Is it just slippery on the floor?
Yeah, it was a bit slippery feeling, but I understand it would go on a carpet and it would work a lot better. The ergonomics are great and it is relaxing and comfortable to be in. Just about the ottoman though. Oh, he's brought the carpet. Could you talk about the decision to make the ottoman rock too?
It initially started off as a higher stool.
Okay.
So it was the first version was 18 inches high. This is down to 13 because as we were using it as a footstool, we found people's knees locked in as they would swing and rock.
Yeah, because you try to rock yourself with a rocking chair off the ottoman, or you're supposed to be on the chair and the ottoman rocking them both. Give us the demo
exactly.
there. Yeah, like if the ottoman sloped a little bit more to the feet,
Mhm.
I would find it a bit more comfortable. And I would almost want to be able to just use the ottoman to push a bit, but that's just my own feeling for it. I think the detailing, the fact that you made it all out of the same jig is kind of fascinating and interesting. The bevel and whatever is great, but I'm happy with sitting in the chair, but I just didn't really get the ottoman.
Okay.
Hello, hello. There's something about the amount of cane on the back that I just wasn't expecting. And I think it makes it look a bit more like an old person chair than I was expecting.
Okay.
I don't know how to say that another way. Maybe even just starting the back so there'd be a break between the seat and the back would give it more of maybe a contemporary feel. But I found that I was surprised at how much cane there is and how much it made it feel that way for me, because otherwise it really doesn't at all.
When you do see the whole back, whether you want a gap, but I don't really, I guess structurally, well, I guess you have the frame, just because it is that shape, that lemon shape, that eyelid shape is odd. Like when the frames are also square. Are you
Right.
following what I'm saying?
Yeah, but the seat in the back is this sort of the joint that's holding those two together, really. Yeah, but this is the strong joint that's keeping the seat in the back together. So,
It goes over and overlaps, and then you have this line. Maybe that's what everyone's talking about. It's just that everything else is kind of thick in the back. It's thin, it's fine.
I think it could also be that the shape of the cane following the curvature in both orientations might then just rationalize that shape a little further. But I think Vance is right in terms of the connection between the back and the seat. That's really where the strength is, because there's just two dowels connecting the back to the side frames. So it's sort of like a, consider maybe a necessary evil, but I think there's something kind of nice about seeing the shape of the cane and the shape of the walnut in that.
I think also just the consistency and the curvature worked out great in terms of fabrication. You had all these parts made, and then all of a sudden, I was in textiles, came back, and Vance had a rocking chair. So I think just in terms of setting out a goal to like be appealable to like mass production or even just like a small batch of 20 of them is like very applicable to this design, because you truly can have like all these parts made and put it together in like a week. Like it. So I commend you for that. It's great.
Thank you. No, no.
Not the whole thing.
I was going to say, I really, really appreciate.
Okay.
I do really appreciate that you went for a demographic that isn't the young contemporary folk, but at the same time that it's focused towards the older crowd. This also does appeal to a pregnant woman, which a whole other demographic, which is young people. And I don't think that, personally, I look at this and I think, oh, this is for the old folk. I think I look at this and it has tradition, rustic feel, but because you've kind of stripped away those more embellished turned elements that I see a lot in rocking chairs, you've made this quite contemporary. I think that you've done a great job with that. And I do think that the whole flat back cane is comfortable, but you can, you add pillows usually to these types of things, a blanket, and that is going to cover up the back. So I think there's an advantage to just having it like that. I
Right.
think you've done a great job, and I appreciate that it's what it is.
Thank you. Okay.
It's really, careful, Cody, careful. It's quite comfortable.
Great.
There's parts here that you haven't really talked about. So now that I put my hands on it, I can, there's an angle.
Right, that's
Or
that
if you did talk
taper.
about it, I apologize, but.
It's my famous Instagram video. We're putting it through the shaper, so that's adding that
So
taper.
then, can you just tell me a little bit about that choice? What's that there for?
It was a recommendation by Peter initially to sort of bring a visual interest into the side. So instead of just having a complete flat side, it tapers from 1.5 inches on the outside to 1 inch width on the inside. And then the inside rail that the seat rests on is just flat at that 1 inch thickness.
Right.
And so it just sort of brings the sides, gives it a sort of a flow inward.
It really works without it really works without the ottoman. I'm finding.
Great.
I'm finding with the ottoman as well. I agree. When someone sat it at first, something looked awkward watching the two of them, that being the chair and the ottoman, seeming to almost be working against each other for some reason. So I was curious when I sat in it, how would that feel?
Right.
But sitting in it here with my feet planted on the ground, the heights, everything, my back actually feels quite comfortable.
Great.
Because I do qualify in the older bracket now, so
Welcome.
this is comfortable.
Great.
And I appreciate the fact that you attempted something with cane, because there's some complexity that goes into the shape. I think that in getting it right in terms of how to tension the cane and apply it correctly so that it dries and has this, it's taut as it is.
Great.
I've done some cane work lately, so I appreciate it's not as straightforward, or if it is, maybe I didn't understand. But,
Well, we can talk.
It's no, I think it's really well executed. I think you should be proud of.
Great, thank you. I
of
am.
what you've accomplished with it. I think there's definitely a group of people that would be very happy to sit and look out the window in their rocking chair.
Great.
I'm good with it. Can we see you in it though? We haven't seen you sit in it.
Sure.
Maybe
Nice.
the ottoman is for the grandkids sitting next to you there.
Well, that's what it's actually started with a story with Cody when it was a stool, and that his grandmother or great grandmother, I forget which one, yeah, had to. I forget that she moved and had to change to a wheelchair. Yeah, so you could no longer really sit side by side. So to interact with his great grandmother, he would have to sit, towards her. And so that's partly where the stool idea came from with the older adults. But then it transitioned itself, into a footstool.
Also, just the continuation of parts, that consideration for that lumbar being a different curvature, I think really comes to life when all the other components are very in unison with one another, and that subtle detail to switch that curvature, I think really becomes apparent because of the contrasting curvature, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah, we kind of pushed you also with the ottoman a little bit. And this is great to see Cody sitting there.
Oh,
yeah. It's so delightful to see it all together, just that it had this trajectory from day one that just gradually came through the sketching, models, mock-ups, tests, to a culmination where we are today. And I think it's a real testament to your methodical approach that I think you've grown into almost despite yourself over the time you've been in the program, realizing that your intentions don't always have to be paramount, that you're kind of like it's at service to a greater goal somehow.
Sure.
And there's so I think you've been super consistent at trying to get to this point, but imagining this point in September in a way. So I think the changes that you made all along, based on feedback, but also based on your canvassing for interest and so on. And I think that really helped a lot. And I know we've talked about your initial intention to get involved with more directed research with, say, the Elder Research Center and so on, and you went through all the hoops to get the ethics clearance to do all of that research. And I think maybe at a certain point you just went, okay, well, I've done that, and now I'm just going to make this thing. And I think that it's an opportunity lost on one level, but it also means that you are here where you are now and maybe didn't get as distracted. But I think it's really about having the ability to add just an extra level of complexity that I would have loved to have seen. But it's so satisfying. When I came in yesterday, I saw this thing, or the day before, I saw it, complete, and just like as though it did just get made within that week. And I know it didn't, because I saw all those processes.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly comfortable to sit in. And I'd agree about the ottoman in terms of its use actually sitting at it, but I think it's a great visual companion. And I love the fact that it sort of slides underneath there. It's a great addition to the scope.
Great.
And,
Thank you.
I don't think it's necessarily a logical production item yet, but I think you can probably take it to a point where in limited production, but this is still the $5,000 rocker.
Right.
But again, someone's going to want that. So it's, again, just like everybody finding that person. But great on you to have gone from a very insular design process that was entirely self-referential when you first came into this program to a point where it's still self-referential because it's, acknowledging your limitations with arthritis, but that's something that expands out much to a wider audience.
Sure.
It's
Yep.
really great to see.
Thank you.